Well, good evening. Tonight on the program, Tim Scott is considering a run in 2024, plus former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has bowed out of the race. Political strategist Rina Shah is with us on that. Also, the Tennessee Three, the three lawmakers that took to the floor of the state legislature to protest gun violence. They're back. Representative Justin J. Pearson speaks to Wyatt just ahead. Plus, Wyatt is live from Queens Park tonight, where lawmakers are officially back from their brief spring hiatus with lots of hot-button issues on the table. Hello and good evening. I'm Jackson Gosnell. Wyatt is on assignment tonight. We begin with the 2024 presidential race as South Carolina Senator Tim Scott is considering a bid for president. All right, tonight on the program, as many Republicans continue entering the presidential race, what exactly does the landscape of that look like, and what should you expect next? Rina Shah joins us now, a political strategist. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, thanks to be with you.
I wanted to ask about Tim Scott's new exploratory committee for president. Do you think he actually goes all in with a full-fledged race?
Coming out of the gate, I love how Senator Tim Scott is handling this potential announcement to run for the presidential nomination in 2024. The exploratory committee phase is such an important phase when somebody is looking to enter the primary contest process. And in doing so, he's shown that he's different from former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, somebody I believe he'd call a friend. She came right out and very emphatically said, I am running. He is taking these baby steps. And I think that's actually a good strategy right now. He's not looking to do anything that's bombastic. He's clearly not looking to ruffle feathers, which sort of speaks to his time in the U.S. Senate so far. He's been somebody that is measured, almost practical, very reasonable. And in the era of Trump, that was rather hard to find in the Senate chamber. He, of course, is the colleague of Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, somebody who has talked very definitively about his abortion stance. In the past, he's talked about a 15-week ban. Now, Tim Scott, on the other hand, when it comes to abortion, has said he's 100% pro-life. And I bring this up because for the first time just this past Friday, we heard from Senator Tim Scott how he feels about abortion. Now, did he come out and give an actual policy position? No. But he said were he to become the Republican nominee for 2024, he would have the most conservative position on abortion out of anyone. And I think that was a real change, something that he did not have to do, but he's did it. And so here we are looking at Tim Scott trying to be the real social conservative in this Republican primary contest so far.
Do you think that he has any shot at actually winning, though, against someone like former President Trump, who has a lot of support? While certainly there's a lot of people who don't like him either, he still has a lot of support. Do you think Scott has any shot at winning?
Now, to be very clear, there are only two big names in the 2024 Republican primary contest so far. That is former President Donald Trump and former governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, who did work for the Trump administration in her role as ambassador to the United Nations. Now, since coming out, she has definitely been critical of Trump in moments, but she's also not been hard enough on him because he is an opponent of hers in this race. And I haven't really seen the punches that one would expect for an opponent. Now, there is a third lesser known candidate named Vivek Ramaswamy, and I believe he's a businessman as well. So officially, Senator Tim Scott is not in this race, but I do believe he has a better shot at toppling Donald Trump than Nikki Haley. And I have a couple reasons for why. If he's able to successfully shift the zeitgeist, in this primary contest, it would be by doing two things. And that's leaning into two areas that he's been quite good on. One is the economy. He's championed something called opportunity zones for many years. Now, those are distressed areas throughout the United States that court investment, seen as an economic revitalization tool. And secondly, education. He's a big proponent of school choice. And let's not forget how important the issue of education is to the Republican electorate, especially initially. This is an issue that galvanized American mothers, particularly those that were right of center and maybe independent now even. It was so galvanizing in the post-pandemic era for them, this issue of education. And it's an issue that propelled Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, to his win just a couple years ago almost. So we are really looking at a moment here where Tim Scott has an entryway, but that is if the political winds shift and change. He certainly has a better shot than Nikki Haley, is what I believe in this very moment. No problem.
Okay, so I want to ask about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Do you think Governor DeSantis throws his hat in? If he does, do you think Tim Scott still holds on to any edge that you think he might have otherwise? Because, as you know, Governor DeSantis is a younger version of Donald Trump.
Governor Ron DeSantis has been called Donald Trump light, and I don't think that's an incorrect characterization. There are many inside the Beltway who are very keen to see the Florida governor toss his hat in the ring, and all sort of indicators show that he is mounting a run, that he is exploring a run before having formed an exploratory committee. Now, look, Tim Scott, for example, again, the U.S. Senator from South Carolina, who has formed the exploratory committee, I believe he fancies himself to be a real social conservative and sees an entryway for himself as the lone Black Republican in the U.S. Senate, somebody who's unmarried, somebody who's younger as well, and somebody who grew up in poverty. And so, again, is able to really get to the heart of people, to get to people's hearts and minds on the economic message, and particularly grab that swath of independent voters that is so important as we lead up to November 2024. But when we talk about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis having a shot against Tim Scott, we have to take into account one big sort of elephant in the room, no pun intended, and it's fundraising. Right now, Nikki Haley, in the most recent sort of fundraising figures I saw, she was able to pull in something like 11 million in 6 weeks. Now, is that some really huge number? In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. And I don't think we should discount that. So there are a lot of Republican donors out there yearning for yesteryear. They're yearning for normalcy. They don't want the chaos that Donald Trump brings with him. And they also recognize that Trump lost the 2020 election, no matter what he says and no matter what his allies continue to try to promulgate in the states. Election denialism, I do not believe, is going to be one of the issues as we lead up to 2024. But I do believe abortion will. So what I do see Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, as well as U.S. Senator Tim Scott doing right now, is going for abortion and going for the social issues right now to see how much of the far right social conservatives they can peel off, and then they will come to the center, because historically the American president does come to the center when they win the White House and do begin to govern.
Earlier, Wyatt Sharpe spoke exclusively to Tennessee State Representative Justin J. Pearson, who was just reinstated into the Tennessee State Legislature. Here is that exclusive conversation. Well, you heard from my next guest on the program last week as he was fighting to be reinstated into the Tennessee State Legislature after he was expelled from Republican lawmakers after taking to the floor of the Tennessee State Legislature to protest calling for action against the rise in gun violence. Joining me now is Tennessee State Representative Justin J. Pearson, who has just been reinstated back into the Tennessee State Legislature. Thanks so much for making the time. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just start out. You are now reinstated into the Tennessee State Legislature. When we spoke last time, I think a lot of people were expecting that, but obviously I'm sure there's always a little bit of doubt, at least until it actually happens. So now that you are back in the Tennessee State Legislature, what can people expect from you? What are you going to be looking for as you are now back in the legislature?
In Alabama, in addition to what happened in Louisville, and before that in Nashville. We have a lot of people who have access to guns and weapons who should not have them. And we have a lot of people who are not changing the policies and the laws and the legislation that needs to be changed in order to make our community safer. And so this is going to be a top priority for myself, for District 86, and for a lot of us who are progressive in the Democratic Party in Tennessee.
And obviously, you were expelled from the legislature along with your colleague, Justin Jones. Gloria Johnson, Representative Johnson, was not. She came within one vote. But a lot of people are kind of bringing up the idea that perhaps it might start a bigger conversation surrounding the idea of, how much power a legislative body should have to actually expel someone from a legislative body, given that they were, duly elected by constituents and by the voters. I'm wondering, do you think it is time to perhaps have a more serious conversation around that?
Well, definitely. I think when you have people who can bend the rules and use the rules in such an egregious way that they can actually subvert the democratic process and then force a community to pay $1 million for an election, it's an injustice and it's unfair and it is just completely and utterly wrong. But we cannot detract away from why we were expelled, why Representative Johnson was nearly expelled. It was because we were advocating for the end of gun violence. We were advocating that we start to listen to students and we start to listen to parents and we start to listen to community members who are tired of seeing the proliferation of guns and the bad legislation that's being passed that's making it easier for people to access these weapons, and particularly weapons of war like assault rifles, AR-15s, AK-47s, in the hands of individuals who really should not have them, and in the hands of normal people and ordinary citizens who shouldn't have access to them. And we have to continue to prioritize that issue and center that issue because that's why we were expelled. That's why Representative Johnson was nearly expelled. It was because we did a peaceful protest, listening to the thousands of people in our communities and in our state who were demanding we do something about gun violence.
And the example that led to your expulsion was obviously the tragic situation at the Covenant Christian School in Nashville. You were kind of protesting as a result of that, calling for action. But I mean, even just since then, there's been tragedies in Louisville, Kentucky. The governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear, has come out and has been open about the fact that he lost several friends as a result. You also have very recently another tragic situation out of Alabama. I guess, what do you make of all of these, combined tragedies that are resulting in families losing loved ones? And what can various legislative bodies, such as the Tennessee state legislature, as an example, do in order to at least try and, put a spotlight on it and try and fix it?
Yeah, these are real and preventable tragedies, and they are tragic. They continue to occur. And in the country, the United States of America, it's a place where most of these mass shootings occur across the world. And the legislatures or across the country have a responsibility to pass just laws that actually prevent this from happening. There is real legislation we can pass for the gun storage safety laws, red flag laws, universal background checks, and banning assault weapons from being in the hands of individuals that we can pass. There also has to be a lot of work on gun violence prevention because the reality is a lot of people have access to guns today. In the United States, there's a gun for every American. And so we have to figure out, how do we prevent people from using those guns, using those weapons against fellow community members? Because these tragedies that are happening day after day, person after person, shattering community after community, do not need to be a status quo that we silently and complicitly accept. We have to, in a very meaningful and deliberate way, fight against that because it doesn't have to be this way.
And when you look at how you can legislate action to actually prevent situations like this from happening, when you, Representative Jones and Representative Johnson, initially took to the floor of the Tennessee state legislature after the situation at the Covenant Christian School in Nashville, what were you hoping to get out of doing that? And do you think that action that could be taken by a legislative body such as your own in the Tennessee state legislature, do you think that reasonably could put an end to some of these tragic situations like we are seeing all too common?
I think we cannot underestimate the power of legislation to help prevent the loss of life. Whether you think about legislating the fact that people need to wear seatbelts, right? There are things that legislatures can do that help to keep people safe and keep people alive. And so we don't want to in any way underestimate that. Myself, Representative Jones went to the well of the House and the Tennessee General Assembly so that the people in our communities could be heard, so that children and parents and grandparents who are advocating for the end to gun violence would finally know that there were people inside of this chamber who were listening to them and who were speaking the same language that they were speaking, that we have to do something, we have to act. I believe that message is going forward, and the momentum that is being built in Tennessee and across our nation is extraordinary. and helping to continue to put this narrative forward that we need to do something about gun violence, and we cannot accept the inability to do something as if we are not elected leaders with the power to legislate. And putting our hands up or just sending thoughts and prayers is not enough. And that isn't what people across the state of Tennessee want for us to do. They want us to put our hands to the plow and get to work.
And I mean, I myself am I'm kind of fascinated behind the policy development aspect of things. So when you look at actually developing legislation for this, how can you actually get, say the Republicans or even, there are some Democrats, at least at a federal level, you have people like Senator Joe Manchin or Senator Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, people who don't necessarily side with the Democrats all that often. And then I'm sure there may be some examples like that in the Tennessee state legislature as well. How can you bring everyone on your side to try and get as much support as possible to pass the type of legislation that you're talking about?
Yeah, everyone wants to be safe in their community. Everyone wants to go to a bank and be safe. Everyone wants to go to their kid's 16-year-old birthday party and be safe. Everyone wants their children to go to school. You want to go to school. I want to go to college or university and be safe. Everybody wants to be safe in their communities. Nobody is against that. The reality is what we have done up until this point is say there's nothing we can do in a meaningful or intentional way to keep our community safe. And that's just wrong. And the expectation now, I think, from a lot of groups and a lot of people is that putting your hands up and saying there's no more we can do is absolutely not factual, because we have not tried anything to do to make our community safer. And the reality is, if in the state of Tennessee, we put more energy behind ending and preventing gun violence as we did around banning drag shows, we would see a lot more just legislation passed.
All right, we'll leave it there. Tennessee State Representative Justin J. Pearson, thanks so much for making the time once again, and look forward to chatting again. Thanks.
Thanks, Wyatt. We'll keep fighting.
Joining me now to discuss some of the latest in American politics, specifically his call for California Senator Dianne Feinstein to step down from her role as California's senator, is California Congressman Ro Khanna. Thanks so much for making the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be on.
Let's just start out with your call for Senator Feinstein to step down. Why do you believe that Senator Feinstein needs to step down? I know a lot of Democrats have been talking about, a lot of political observers in general have been talking about her role on the Judiciary Committee. Speak a little bit about that.
Well, she's had an extraordinary career. She's been an icon on women's rights, on gun violence. But the sad part is she's missed 75% of her votes this Congress. There's no indication of when she's going to come back. And the judges that the president's nominating are, as a result, stalled. They aren't moving out of the Judiciary Committee. Senator Durbin has said that. And that's really hurting our progress in getting these judges confirmed.
And I mean, I suppose moving forward too, when you look at what it kind of says about ensuring that there is diverse representation in politics, obviously you mentioned Senator Feinstein has, an incredible career in politics, but moving forward, how can we bring in, diverse voices, young voices, of a variety of different perspectives to serve in a capacity as, say, a U.S. Senator, congressional representative, et cetera?
Well, you're off to a great start doing podcasts at a young age. We need more young people getting involved in the political process, showing up to their city councils, showing up to Congress, showing up to town halls, writing letters to the editor, being on social media. And we have to make the barriers easy for them. Right now, it takes so much money to run. That's one of the big barriers. It takes so much name ID. How do we overcome that? But I do think that things are changing. I sense this with all the young House progressives that were elected. And maybe not in the 24 cycle, but certainly by 26, 28, you're going to have a new generation leading in America.
And how do you kind of bridge the divide? How do you unite as Democrats? I mean, for example, when you look at the California Senate race right now with Katie Porter, Adam Schiff, also Barbara Lee, someone I know you are a supporter of, is running. I mean, when you look at that race, whoever is elected as the next U.S. Senator from California, how can you bridge the divides between the various candidates who are all Democrats and who all seem to share, at least to a certain degree, a similar viewpoint?
Well, one, it's good that we have a competitive primary that brings out the best in candidates. So we'll see if Barbara Lee brings a great perspective on anti-war advocacy. Adam Schiff, of course, has stood up to Donald Trump. Katie Porter has been very good on consumer protection issues and let those issues come out. I'm supporting Barbara Lee because I think we need a senator who's going to stand up against these endless wars and make sure we don't get into one in the Middle East. But I believe it'll help mobilize the state, and we'll emerge stronger from it, just like we emerged stronger when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton ran against each other.
And just lastly, before we conclude on a somewhat separate issues surrounding the Trump indictment with the indictment of the former president, he is still a candidate in 2024. That is how a lot of people see him right now. He's also the former president of the United States. What does it mean that he's running for president, that he's been indicted? And what are you expecting on that front, given that a lot of Republicans believe he is favorite at this point amongst the Republican crowd to go up against President Joe Biden?
Well, it means that we need to let the legal process play out, and we shouldn't be opining on it. Anything Democrats say would sound political. Anything Republicans would say would sound political. But he will have all of the protections anyone does in the legal process, and I'm confident that there will be a reasonable outcome. I think the biggest thing in terms of all that going on for his politics is just people are tired of all the baggage and the scandals, and they want politicians to work to improve their lives. The big scandal in this country is that, unlike in Canada, every American here doesn't have health care. Our wages are stagnating. People are concerned about the cost of childcare. I want to have $10 a day childcare here in America. How do we deal with those issues? People don't want to be, they may be glued to television because it's sensational, but they want their president working for them.
All right, California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman, thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Wyatt.
And finally tonight, Wyatt Sharpe is with us live tonight from Queen's Park as lawmakers return from their spring hiatus. Key points of discussion as the legislature returns: the rising cost of living and the Ontario Liberal Party leadership announcement. Wyatt, what do we know so far?
Yeah, Jackson, really a lot of important issues on the table for MPPs as they make their way back to Queen's Park after a brief spring hiatus. Amongst just some of the important issues for lawmakers as they make their way back to Queen's Park, the rising cost of living, as well as Education Minister Stephen Lecce, who made an announcement earlier today. Also, the Ontario Science Centre, a potential relocation of that's getting a lot of attention, not just from the government, but also from several of the opposition parties as well. I had a chance to catch up with official opposition NDP leader Marit Stiles earlier today for a one-on-one interview, and here is that conversation. So Marit, obviously the legislature is now back after a brief spring hiatus. What are some of the key issues that the NDP are going to be pushing for and pushing for advocacy for as the spring session gets started?
Well, you know, one of the things I've found, Wyatt, is that this government continues to not really address the real needs of Ontarians, of regular Ontarians. As I go across the province, like I did last week, talking to like just regular people, they're really struggling. They're struggling with an affordability crisis. A lot more people are going to food banks, even if they have full-time jobs or multiple jobs. People are struggling with the cost of living, of groceries and housing. And we aren't really seeing any real solutions here being brought forward by this government. So we're going to keep bringing those solutions forward, right? We're going to keep talking about what the solutions are. I think this government's going to spend the next little while continuing to try to convince Ontarians that they're really working for them. But we see again and again that they're really only putting forward proposals that benefit a very few very wealthy people who happen to generally be donors and friends of this government.
And one issue that has been getting a lot of discussion as the legislature returns is the Ontario Science Centre. I guess, what do you make of the various perspectives arising on that, and what would you like the government to do on that front?
Yeah, well, I have to say I was surprised to hear this emerge as some plan that the government apparently, to me, it came out of nowhere. I think, you know, a lot of us have gone to use the Ontario Science Centre. It's a wonderful facility. It's a special place. And, you know, certainly I'd love to see the government, you know, invest in that facility and do even more exciting things. So I don't know where this plan is coming from. I think that it is an attempt by this government. I suspect it may be an attempt by the government to distract from the fact that they're actually giving like $650 million to this private Austrian corporation to build this fancy private spa. They're basically selling off our public land, and Ontario Place is a wonderful it's a wonderful resource that everybody in this province can enjoy. I want to see the government, do great things to support that as continuing as a public space. I want to see them support the Ontario Science Centre. I'm very concerned because there's a lot of questions about why they're suddenly making this decision, and I'm worried that once again we're going to see the government maybe making some kind of sweetheart deal that benefits a few of their friends as opposed to the people of this province, because these things belong to us, right, as Ontarians.
And obviously, there's two progressive parties in the legislature for the most part, the Liberals and the NDP. The Liberals just announced yesterday that they will elect their new leader later this year in December. What do you make of, I guess, the ongoing battle, so to speak, between Liberals and the NDP, and what will a new leader of the Liberal Party mean for you and for how the NDP advocates for their positions?
Well, first of all, the Liberals are going to do what they have to do. They're doing a bit of soul searching. They lost again, kind of badly in the last election, and so, they've got to make a decision about what direction they want to go in. So for me, I'm really focused on the job that we have before us, and I have been ever since I decided to run for leader of the NDP. My job is to hold Doug Ford to account and defeat his government in 3 years, and to actually do better for real people, regular people out there. And so while the Liberals are dealing with their stuff, I'm very focused on that, holding Doug Ford to account and building that movement that's going to actually defeat them. So, I don't think I don't think a lot about it, to be honest. I'm much more focused on the real contest, which is between me and the Ontario NDP and Doug Ford and his vision for Ontario.
NDP leader Marit, thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt. It's great to see you here.
John, so obviously now that Queen's Park is back in session after a brief spring hiatus, given that the Liberals have announced their leadership date, lots of different things that a lot of people are looking at, what are the Liberals' priorities for this spring session?
Well, the spring session, it's affordability and healthcare are right at the top of the list. We just had an education bill as well, too. Those will be the things that are at the top of the list, so we'll be working hard on that. And, we're excited about our leadership race, and now that we've got some dates and some plans, we're ready to go.
And as it pertains to the leadership race and some of the various candidates that may announce, you have Kingston and the Islands MPP Ted Chu, who is considering a bid. You have some federal MPs as well. Regardless of who is elected, where do you think the party needs to go from here to get official party status again, to perhaps gain a spot on the official opposition benches or government? What do you think?
Well, look, first of all, we need to get more seats, so we have to do better in the election in terms of translating our votes into seats. We got more votes than the NDP in the last election, but we didn't. We got a quarter of the seats. So, I think we have to look kind of technically inside our local races and each riding to see how we're doing there and improve there. I think we need to, when we elect a new leader, part of the importance of a leadership race is giving the new leader a party that's stronger and better able to fight in the next election. So we're going to organize a race that I think will bring all the candidates across the province. We're going to have at least 5 debates, which I think is going to be very important to showcase our candidates to every Ontarian, because the goal of the race is for as many Ontarians as possible to have the opportunity to vote for the next Ontario Liberal leader, who with a lot of hard work can become the next Premier of Ontario.
And on the issue of education, you mentioned the education bill that Education Minister Stephen Lecce unveiled today. Obviously, you reacted to it, the NDP reacted to it. What do you make of some of the substance that's in that bill and kind of the intended purpose of the bill? And also with the announcement he made yesterday, some union leaders like Laura Walton, for example, was pointing out that it only equals out to be about 50 cents per student. Do you think that's adequate enough?
Well, look, I think 1,000 teachers is 1 teacher for every 5 schools. So I don't think what the government's doing this bill is going to address the needs of our students post-pandemic. There's not enough there in terms of educational assistance and teachers. Here's the thing. I think what the government's doing with this bill is they're trying to gain more control over the locally owned, publicly funded school board land that's excess in cities and towns all across Ontario. That concerns me, because I don't trust the Ford government when it comes to the public interest in publicly owned land like the Greenbelt or Ontario Place or some of those ministerial zoning orders that we've seen across the province. I think the real play here is they're trying to gain control over land that really belongs to people locally, not the centre.
And I guess so then just moving forward, given that the government is clearly not just prioritizing or trying to prioritize this bill, but also with the Ontario Science Centre, like there's lots of issues that they're trying to balance all at one time. How should the government go about balancing those, and how can they bring in issues and issues to the table that haven't been addressed?
Well, look, I think the thing that's actually most shocking right now in this budget is that there was no real recognition that families are facing an affordability crisis. This government did nothing at all to address families' needs. They could have raised the Ontario child benefit by $50 a month so that would help families that are struggling to put food on the table. They could have helped children and families with extracurricular, just a little bit to help people. People don't expect everything, but what they'd like is for their lives to be a bit easier. I think the government didn't address that in the budget. That's something they should do. I think what they're doing in healthcare right now is the wrong direction. It's not the direction we want to go into. We want to build a strong publicly funded system. We don't want to break it up and sell it off.
All right, Interim Liberal Party Leader John Fraser. Thanks John. Appreciate it.